In our headlines at this hour, the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework for Prosperity has been launched, with President Yoon Suk-yeol vowing to solidify the regional supply chain as his global counterparts also address regional security under the Quad framework. And President Yoon Suk-yeol is on the list of 100 most influential people for this year, as acknowledged by Time magazine for his efforts to ensure regional peace and prosperity amid North Korea's provocations. Meanwhile, South Korea's Daegu City is hosting the 28th World Gas Conference, an event that seeks to promote the role of natural gas in a sustainable future. Hello and welcome to the Daily Report. It's Tuesday afternoon, May 24th here in South Korea. We start with the launching ceremony of the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework for Prosperity that was hosted by US President Joe Biden in Japan. Here in South Korea, President Yoon Suk-yeol partook in the event virtually and pledged to strengthen the regional supply chain. Our presidential office correspondent Yoon Jung-min reports.
인도 태평양 지역의 공동 번영 시대를 열어가기 위해 함께 힘을 모읍시다. 한국도 굳건한 연대를 바탕으로 책임을 다해 나갈 것입니다.
South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol became one of the 13 inaugural members of the U.S.-led Indo-Pacific Economic Framework on Monday, along with leaders of Japan, India, and Australia. Joining the launch ceremony hosted by U.S. President Joe Biden in Japan by video link, President Yoon pledged to create a mutually beneficial supply chain in the region, particularly on chips, batteries, and future cars where South Korean technology excels. Although it's seen by many as an economic bloc meant to counter China's dominance, the South Korean leader said IPEF is not limited to a certain set of contents, but that it is an evolving entity which will establish new roles of commerce in the fastest growing part of the world. He also stressed in his speech that he hopes the IPEF seeks openness, transparency, and inclusiveness, as mentioned in the South Korea-U.S. joint statement this past weekend during President Biden's trip to Seoul. On his way to work on Monday morning, Mr. Yoon said the IPEF is no like a free trade agreement and explained why South Korea should take part in it.
이거는 인도 태평양 영내에서 경제 통상과 관련한 좀 광범위한 룰을 만들어 나가는 과정입니다. 그래서 거기에 우리가 당연히 참여를 해야 되는 것이고, 그 룰을 만들어가는 과정에서 우리가 빠진다고 한다면은 국익에도 피해가 많이 갈 것입니다.
Experts say South Korea's participation in IPEF will enable Asia's fourth largest economy to reduce dependence on China, its biggest trading partner, by diversifying its supply chain and trade portfolio. And Seoul's top office says it doesn't expect any retaliatory action from China, as it's also part of the China-led RCEP, and since we live in a complementary world where there's no zero-sum game. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
Up next, my colleague Kim Bo-kyung touches upon the four pillars of this new regional trade framework that neighboring China has sought to denounce. Do take a look.
Aiming to boost the economic competitiveness of the Indo-Pacific region. The Indo-Pacific Economic Framework for Prosperity, or the IPEF, was officially launched on Monday in Tokyo. A U.S.-led program seeking to establish a comprehensive economic framework in the Indo-Pacific region kicked off with 13 initial member countries, including the United States, South Korea, Japan, Australia, New Zealand, and India, along with 7 out of the 10 ASEAN countries, including Singapore and Thailand. U.S. President Joe Biden said Washington will be deeply invested in the Indo-Pacific region, committed to fulfilling its vision of a positive future.
The Indo-Pacific covers half the population of the world and more than 60% of the global GDP. And the nations represented here today, and those who will join this framework in the future, are signing up to work toward an economic vision that will deliver for all people, all our people.
Japan will participate in IPEF, working closely with the United States and hand in hand with ASEAN countries and other partners in the region to help create the new framework.
First proposed by Biden last October during the East Asia Summit, the alliance focuses on 4 pillars. Building free and fair trade commitments, making supply chains more resilient by mitigating the effects of disruptions, accelerating the development of clean energy technologies to decarbonize the economies, and lastly, promoting fair competition. The United States said it will convene a ministerial meeting soon to come up with specific agendas for each category and how the framework will work. China has responded already, saying it is doomed to fail and that it is wrong for the U.S. to use the initiatives as a political tool to exclude others. Yet as IPEF does not include tariff elimination, one expert has doubts as to whether it will be effective in containing China.
Because it is not legal, there is no legal obligations. I think the individual members of IPEF will still be open to trade with China as long as they respect few restrictions on things like technology transfers, which the United States is enforcing anyway through its limits on technology transfers.
김보경, 아리랑 뉴스.
Also in Tokyo, leaders of the US, Australia, India and Japan are holding their Quad Summit on this Tuesday to touch upon a range of regional matters amid the presence of an assertive China. The summit seeks to stress on international law compliance, and a new initiative aimed at addressing illegal fishing in the Indo-Pacific is being shared. Also on the agenda is Russia's invasion of Ukraine and its broader repercussions on global order. This is the second in-person summit in less than a year, and the leaders are slated to issue a statement soon. Meanwhile, the U.S. held a virtual meeting to hammer out a support plan for Ukraine amid Russia's invasion. South Korea, for its part, has pledged assistance as well. Our Defense Ministry correspondent Peun-ji has more.
The U.S. on Monday local time hosted a virtual meeting of the Ukraine Defense Contact Group to coordinate security aid for Ukraine. More than 40 nations took part, including South Korea, as well as NATO and EU countries. This was the second such meeting following one held at an airbase in Germany last month. During the meeting, the Pentagon chief said that some 20 countries have pledged new security assistance for Ukraine.
That includes some 20 countries that announced new security assistance packages. Many countries are donating critically needed artillery ammunition, coastal defense systems, and tanks and other armored vehicles. Others came forward with new commitments for training Ukraine's forces and sustaining its military systems.
The U.S. chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff also stressed that there will be further support for Ukraine.
We want to continue to support Ukraine defending their country. We want to make sure NATO is unified.
Following the virtual meeting, South Korea's defense ministry said Tuesday that it is considering more assistance for Kyiv, but refused to say if any package would include so-called lethal aid.
Considering the situation in Ukraine, we are currently pushing ahead with plans to provide additional military aid. We are making efforts to make sure it's given as soon as possible.
South Korea has been saying that it will only provide non-lethal aid to Ukraine. So far, the country has provided $50 million worth of assistance, including medical supplies, bulletproof vests, and helmets. Peun-ji, Arirang News.
Also on the local front, Foreign Minister Park Jin has highlighted the amiable atmosphere that surrounded the summit between Presidents Yoon and Biden here in the capital city this past weekend. Our Kim Dami has more on Park's remarks.
The leaders of South Korea and the U.S. have reaffirmed that they're the closest of partners, enjoying a trust based on shared universal values such as a liberal democracy and human rights, an alliance now at a whole new level. This is Seoul's Foreign Minister Park Jin speaking on Monday at a briefing on the outcomes of the summit between South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol and his U.S. counterpart Joe Biden. Park stressed that the meeting was the most convivial and friendly summit he's ever attended.
The two sides have proposed a vision of a future alliance that is a global comprehensive strategic alliance with plans not only for the Korean Peninsula but also the Indo-Pacific region and the international order based on values such as freedom, democracy, market economy, and human rights.
To actively take part in this vision, Park further explained that the Yoon administration is interested in hosting the Summit for Democracy, which Washington proposed late last year to address growing challenges to democracy worldwide, namely China and Russia. He then noted that President Yoon said at the summit that South Korea plans to establish its own Indo-Pacific strategy, which the U.S. side welcomed. It's the first time Seoul has formally proposed a diplomatic strategy based on such a concept of the region. And in a first for a pair of South Korean and American leaders, they pledged to bring to bear all their defense capabilities, including their nuclear missile assets, to deal with North Korea's military threats. The strengthened alliance also covers technology, where South Korea and the U.S. are looking to boost their cooperation in semiconductors and other advanced technologies. Also at the top of the agenda was North Korea's complete denuclearization. According to Bach, Seoul and Washington have vowed to deal firmly with Pyongyang's provocations while leaving the door for dialogue open and exploring ways to provide the regime with humanitarian aid. The foreign minister further underlined that by enhancing Seoul-Washington alliance, South Korea has no intention to ostracize China, and he said the foreign ministry plans to launch its own IPEF teams within the North American bureaus to swiftly implement the measures that came out of the Yoon-Biden summit. 김다미, Arirang News.
And in other news, South Korea will seek to achieve carbon neutrality by pursuing the right blend of nuclear power, renewable energy and natural gas. Now, this is according to President Yoon Suk-yeol earlier on this Tuesday as he opened the 28th World Gas Conference in the nation's southeastern city of Daegu. Noting the importance of natural gas in meeting global energy demands and its benefits for greenhouse gas reduction, President Yoon called for an innovative, sustainable approach to easing carbon emissions and transitioning to hydrogen industries. Now, Yoon came into office earlier this month on a pledge to scrap his predecessor's nuclear phase-out policy. Meanwhile, some 20,000 industry leaders and policymakers from 80 countries are attending the world's largest triennial global gas event this year. And later on this Tuesday evening, President Yoon Suk-yeol will host a dinner for a group of National Assembly speakers whose terms are nearing an end. The group will include Speaker Park Byung-seok and Deputy Speakers Chung Jin-seok and Kim Sang-hee. The senior secretaries, including the Presidential Chief of Staff Kim Dae-gi, are also expected to join the meal. President Yoon earlier sought to have dinner with leaders of the ruling and opposition parties, but scheduling issues by the main opposition Democratic Party have hindered this proposed dinner. Meanwhile, Time magazine has included President Yoon Suk-yeol in its list of 100 most influential figures for this year. And Squid Game director Hwang Dong-hyuk is also on that list. Here's our Kim Hyo-sun.
South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol has been named one of Time magazine's 100 most influential people of 2022. The magazine included Yoon in the leaders category, describing him as a new South Korean president who is determined to take on the challenge of resolving increasing tensions on the Korean peninsula. It elaborated that Yoon, a former prosecutor, has offered a, quote, audacious plan to strengthen North Korea's economy in exchange for complete denuclearization. It also underlined how Yoon intends to align with the U.S., Seoul's most important military ally, more closely. This, it noted, will likely create friction with China, South Korea's largest trading partner. It further added that Yoon, who won by a razor-thin margin, needs to prove himself at home to achieve his substantial goals internationally. Meanwhile, Squid Game creator Hwang Dong-hyuk was also on the list alongside Oprah Winfrey, Tim Cook, and other well-known names. It described Hwang as a television and film director who knows how to weave a story and has the ability to take something brutal and make it beautiful. The magazine publishes its selections across 6 categories: leaders, pioneers, artists, innovators, titans, and icons. It has featured the 100 most influential people in the world list every year since 2004. Among past South Korean leaders, former Presidents Moon Jae-in and Park Geun-hye made the list in 2018 and 2013, respectively. Kim Hyo-sun, Arirang News.
And that brings us to the end of part 1 of the Daily Report. We'll be back in a few minutes with part 2, during which we have the foreign media's take on President Joe Biden's Asia trip. Stay with us.
matters.
Welcome back. On Viewpoint today, we stay with diplomatic efforts by the Biden administration here in this part of the world. Now, for more on the U.S. presidential delegation's Asia trip, I have Donald Kirk here in the studio. Donald, it's been a while. Welcome back.
Good to see you again.
I also have Kosuke Takahashi live on the line. Kosuke, it's also been a while with you. Welcome back.
Thank you for having me.
Right, we'll start here in the studio then. Donald, you covered the summit here in Seoul. What would you say were the highlights of the summit between Presidents Yoon and Biden?
Well, frankly, the point that really remains with me most vividly is that they talked about resuming joint U.S. ROK, Republic of Korea exercises, military exercises on the ground, in the air, and at sea. Now, in recent years, ever since the Singapore summit between former President Trump and Kim Jong-un, there have been only computer game exercises, joint exercises, that is. That's a very important move. U.S. commanders believed it was really vital that U.S. and ROK troops train together, that they coordinate together. They say that they really have to be on the ground or in the air or at sea together. They want live exercises and live fire exercises. So that, to me, that's the most important takeaway from the summit. Obviously, there were other important issues too, and notably economic, by the way. But But nonetheless, that's what really sticks with me.
Right. And Kosuke, what were some of the notable takeaways from the meeting between President Biden and Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida back on Monday?
Most of all, two leaders agreed to boost the deterrence of the two nations alliance. This is very important because there have been a lot of anxiety about U.S. commitment to defense of Japan since Russia invaded Ukraine in late February. In particular, there have been growing concern in Tokyo that U.S. cannot deal with nuclear powers such as Russia, China, and North Korea directly. Security concerns has been spreading in Japan, but Biden promised to provide the extended deterrence for Japan. This is very helpful in preventing China from invading disputed Senkaku Islands in East China Sea. Sunny?
Right. And Donald, you were at the joint press conference held by Presidents Yoon and Biden this past Saturday. First of all, what was the hall there like compared to the media venue in Cheongwon?
Okay. I'm going to have to make a small correction. I watched the entire press conference closely on none other than Arirang TV, which had excellent coverage and excellent commentary before and after.
Right, but thank you for your kind words then.
I was not in the room, but I saw the room thanks to Arirang. So again, obviously the atmosphere was rather tense at the beginning. They delayed opening it, you know. People were waiting and waiting and fidgeting around. And finally they opened it maybe half an hour after they said they would. And the leaders, the presidents, made rather pro forma statements. And then they only took a couple of questions, you know, 2 or 3 questions. It was rather brief. There were many more questions that people could have asked. There was a very interesting question at the end from a woman asking about gender equality. I think that threw President Yoon a little off balance, to tell you the honest truth. I don't think he was totally prepared for that question. It was a good question, a great question, a relevant question. And it was good to see a little something out of the ordinary in the press conference.
Right. And Kosuke, what can you share with us about the overall atmosphere during the press conference there in Tokyo following the summit between President Biden and Prime Minister Kishida?
I participated in online media briefing last night. The atmosphere was very warm and relaxing. There was no tough questions and not so many questions from reporters. I think media fully understand that China is a subtext during Biden's visit to Japan, and Biden came here to reaffirm U.S. commitment to the Indo-Pacific region. And by the way, Japanese TV station and news media reported a lot about what kind of food and drinks were served to Biden at lunch and dinner yesterday. Sunny?
Right, I see. And Donald, here among the local media in South Korea, quite a bit of significance has been attached to the fact that President Yoon's first summit with his U.S. counterpart took place less than a fortnight into office. Has this reality also been touched upon by the foreign media?
Well, to a certain extent. I think it's extremely important, frankly, that the president of the ROK should meet the president of the U.S. so soon after his inauguration. That is, President Yoon's inauguration. It was incredible timing, and it comes in the midst of the COVID crisis in North Korea, and it comes in the midst of the Ukraine invasion by Russia. So there was a lot to say very quickly into President Yoon's term. It's also significant that that President Yoon obviously is charting a considerably different policy from that of President Moon, and he really wants to strengthen relations with the U.S. And to get this going so soon after his inauguration, I think was vital, frankly.
Right. And Kosuke, there's also been a bit of attention here on the local front, that is, that Mr. Biden's trip to Asia began in South Korea. Has this particular reality also been addressed by pundits there in Japan?
I know this is related to strong historical rivalry between Japan and South Korea, but in Japan, it is widely viewed. Biden visited Seoul at first because the Australian federal election was held on Saturday, and Biden couldn't come to Japan at first because there was still Australia election going on and couldn't hold the Quad summit much earlier in Tokyo. Japan and US had to wait for Australian new prime minister to be elected to hold the Quad meeting. So not so much focus on this issue in Japan.
Right, I see. Now, Donald, before I ask you this next question, let's take a quick look at this very short clip first. Right, now, Donald, that was President Biden's message to North Korea's Kim Jong-un when asked by a reporter what message he would like to give the North Korean leader. He said, hello, period. How do you interpret this curt address?
Well, right off the bat, I would interpret it as a put-down of former President Trump, who actually claimed that he and Kim Jong-un fell in love. He kept on saying that during their summit in Singapore, which was ridiculous because really the statement that they issued in Singapore said nothing. It talked about everybody wanting denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, which doesn't mean anything as far as North Korea is concerned. It's just talk. So I think that it's very important that President Biden, in his own way, a low-key way, without mentioning President Trump by name, really threw out the relationship between Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un. It made it very clear that he had a different view and a different overall opinion about how to deal with Kim Jong-un.
Right. Donald, also speaking to reporters in Tokyo, Mr. Biden claimed that the U.S. would militarily defend Taiwan in the event of a Chinese invasion. Now, pundits say that such remarks may serve to encourage, prompt that is, instead of deter Chinese aggression against Taiwan. What are your thoughts?
Not really, frankly. I don't quite agree with that. I think it's rhetoric. Obviously, China's going to object strongly to anybody saying that anyone's going to defend Taiwan against China. Taiwan, after all, by acknowledgement of President Biden, is a province of China. So I don't think that President Biden really went that far beyond what other U.S. leaders have been saying for years. But I don't think that China is really going to react beyond the statements from the foreign ministry and beyond the usual bluff and bluster.
Right. Kosuke, aside from regional security here in South Korea, there was much focus also on economic security. That being said, how are observers in Japan assessing the significance of the Indo-Pacific economic framework for this particular region?
Here in Tokyo, there is much focus on economic security as well. First of all, China has implemented economic coercion against Japan, such as rare earth export restrictions in the past. Japan is aiming at warding off so-called China risks, especially in time of the emergency. Secondly, economic security is becoming a new arena in great power competition between U.S. and China. The U.S. is Japan's only ally, so we need to be American side in any way, Sunny.
Right. Kosuke, I have an impromptu question here. I understand that Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida has urged President Biden to partake in the CPTPP. What are the prospects on that front?
Okay. The Japan is very careful about the China's assertive action behaviors in terms of the economic and military. So, the Kishida Fumio is trying to be a strong man aside with the U.S., especially this is ahead of the upper house election in July. He tried to be a respected statesman in Japan now. So anyway, he needs to unite with the Biden closely. He's giving us such kind of impression now.
Right, I see. And Donald, with regard to security here on the Korean Peninsula, much depends on North Korea's future actions, of course. So do you suppose its ongoing battle against the pandemic could perhaps serve as another opportunity for dialogue and diplomacy?
Well, I would say that I would hope it would, but I mean, there's no guarantees. After all, North Korea has not responded to President Biden or to President Yoon's offer of aid. They're not so far. They're not saying anything. They're getting whatever outside aid they're getting from China. So and their medical system is really decrepit anyway. They don't want foreigners or people from South Korea or from anywhere looking around their country too closely and seeing what's going on and seeing how bad their people are being treated and seeing how awful is their medical system, despite all the talk that we hear, all the articles that are put out by KCNA, the Korean news agency, Korean Central News Agency. So I don't think that North Korea is going to be able to do that much while fighting the pandemic, but some people think North Korea is still getting ready for another missile test, maybe even a seventh nuclear test, which is incredible. I would hope that they would sort of postpone or abandon that idea, but there are no guarantees. It's hard to predict what Kim Jong-un is going to do.
Right. Donald, while Washington has said that the door to diplomacy is open with North Korea, the concern here in this part of the world is that the Biden administration may adopt or reinstall, that is, the strategic patience policy with North Korea. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, the door is always open, even during the era of strategic patience when President Obama was in office. The door is open. If North Korea wants to talk, the U.S. will talk. But the U.S. will not agree in advance to doing away with sanctions or to other measures that North Korea wants the U.S. to guarantee beforehand. Before they even talk, the U.S. wants North Korea wants the U.S. to do away with sanctions and take other steps. So the U.S. is not going to agree to that. But obviously the U.S. will sit down and talk anytime. That doesn't mean the talks are going to get anywhere, and it certainly doesn't mean that North Korea is going to say, okay, we'll talk. Maybe, though, there will be talks. There could be the usual run-up to talks, the usual diplomatic interchange, then they sit down at a table and come out with some kind of agreement, which North Korea inevitably violates or doesn't live up to in the end.
Right. Kosuke, meanwhile, what has been disclosed thus far about the Quad summit there among the leaders of Japan, the US, India and Australia, of course?
There are two main focuses on the Quad meeting in Tokyo today. Number one, Australia's new Prime Minister Albanese affirmed to the nation's commitment to Quad, even if the administration changed. His Labour Party was viewed as being very soft on China, but he today showed a strong, tough stance against China. Number two, India's Prime Minister Modi emphasized the strength of our democracy and free and open Indo-Pacific. India has been very soft on Russia, so the US and Japan are trying to retain India in the camp of the free world. But India is very clever. This just could be a balanced diplomacy today.
Right, I see. And Donald, back here in South Korea, the country has joined, of course, the Regional Economic Trade Pact, the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, but it has yet to join the Quad summit. And there is talk about whether it should or it should not. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, I think South Korea wants to remain aloof from the Quad, frankly. I think that there's really no reason they should join the Quad except to gang up on China. Well, why should South Korea gang up on China? South Korea has huge trade relations with China. There's huge South Korean investment in China. So it really behooves South Korea to try to get along with China without giving up their own integrity, without compromising on the alliance with the U.S., and without sort of asking the U.S. to withdraw the THAAD missiles that are down there way south of Seoul. So I think that South Korea really is doing the right policy in saying, well, okay, the Quad is great, but we'll sort of watch it without joining it.
Right. Kosuke, US President Joe Biden has claimed that security and stability within this particular region will depend on the relationship among, that is, South Korea, Japan, and the US. Do you see your prospects for the future with regard to South Korea and Japan's relationship? What are your thoughts?
Frankly speaking, Japanese government still not trust the South Korean new government a lot yet. Because previously, looking back, the Lee Myung-bak administration, Park Geun-hye administration, both conservative party administration, right? But they finally turned into the little bit anti-Japanese policies at the end. So Japan tried to figure out the exact policy of the new Yoon administration's stance against Japan. So I think Japan is still very cautious about the new administration, I think.
So
yes.
It's still watching then?
Still watching, yes. Watching the exact policy.
Right. And one final question to you, Donald, before we wrap up today. What are your thoughts so far with regard to the Yoon administration and its handling of diplomatic affairs?
Well, I think it's doing quite well. By the way, the foreign minister, Park Jin, I've known him off and on for years. And he's a very smooth guy. He's a good talker. And he's quite sympathetic with the U.S. ROK alliance, for sure. So I think that was a good move. And it would be very interesting to see how foreign policy evolves under Mr. Park. I tried to reach him and ask him a couple of questions. I actually had his phone number. He very politely said he couldn't comment to me, which I appreciate. And I'm not going to bother him with more such phone calls. But I hope to see him from time to time in press conferences and briefings and so forth. I think that the U.S. ROK alliance could progress quite well under Mr. Yoon. I think that they're going to strengthen some issues. They're going to strengthen the military cooperation, and they're going to see more closely how to deal with North Korea. One thing that no longer is on the table is the idea of a peace agreement or end of war agreement, peace treaty or end of war agreement with North Korea. President Moon pushed very hard for that. I'm sure he was very disappointed that nothing ever came of it. I don't think it was a good idea. It wasn't viable, and I don't think we're going to hear a lot about that again until or unless there's a change in policy and a change in administration 5 years hence, which, you know, is very hard to predict.
Right, it is. All right, Donald, as always, thank you very much for your time and your thoughts.
Thank you.
And Kosuke, over in Japan, thank you for being with us today.
대단히 감사합니다.
Inflation prospects among the public here has risen for the fourth straight month to highs that have not been forecast in about a decade. Our Yoon has more on this finding.
South Koreans are feeling the squeeze at grocery stores and gas stations. With rising prices, the public's expectation of future inflation rose for a fourth straight month in May to reach its highest in almost a decade. The Bank of Korea's monthly survey of 2,500 households showed that South Koreans expect consumer inflation to average a median 3.3% over the next 12 months. This comes as inflation in the country shot up to a 13-year high in April. Surging energy prices, the weakening Korean won, and the U.S. Fed Reserve's own aggressive rate hikes have all ramped up inflationary pressure. Numbers for the consumer sentiment don't look too bright either. The index stood at 102.6 in May, down 1.2 points from a month earlier, although the reading above 100 means that optimists still outnumber pessimists. Consumer sentiment for both current living standards and future household income were lower than in April. Meanwhile, eyes are on whether the BOK will raise rates to fight inflation during a rate-setting meeting this Thursday. BOK Governor Lee Chang-yong had said last week that a hike of 0.5 percentage point is not completely off the table. Lee Ji-yoon, Arirang News.
On the pandemic front, authorities here have reported 26,344 new cases of COVID-19 over the past 24 hours. Meanwhile, COVID-19 patients, 19 patients that would be lost their lives, while the number of critical cases stands at 232. Back on Monday, South Korea noted fewer than 10,000 infections for the first time in 118 days. Now, despite the uptick in caseloads on this Tuesday, officials point out the tally is the lowest marked for a Tuesday in 16 weeks. And across the border in North Korea, the country there has reported 134,510 new fever cases on this Tuesday. The regime's total case counts of this fever now stands at just under 3 million, and its state-run Korea Central News Agency says 86% of the patients have fully recovered. With no fatalities added between 6 p.m. Sunday and 6 p.m. Monday, the death toll remains at 68. More than a week has passed, but the regime, that is, has yet to respond to South Korea's offer of working-level talks on COVID-19 support. Over in Europe, concerns are mounting as cases of monkeypox continue to climb. But as of now, the global health body says the situation is containable. Our Kim Yeon-sung explains.
Denmark and Scotland on Monday registered their first cases of monkeypox. Cases in England more than doubled on Monday to 56, prompting UK health authorities to advise close contacts to isolate for up to 3 weeks. The World Health Organization is tracking more than 100 confirmed or suspected cases of monkeypox in at least 12 non-African countries. Scientists try to grapple with how monkeypox outbreaks have traveled outside African borders all the way to Europe and North America.
We've seen a few cases in Europe over the last 5 years, just in travelers, but this is the first time we're seeing cases across many countries at the same time in people who have not traveled to the endemic regions in Africa.
The leading theory behind the transnational spread is suggested by Dr. David Heyman, advisor to the World Health Organization. He told the Associated Press that the outbreaks may have started from sexual transmissions at raves in Spain and Belgium.
Many diseases can be spread through sexual contact. You can get a cough or a cold through sexual contact, but it doesn't mean that it's a sexually transmitted disease.
Experts say that monkeypox is unlikely to develop into another COVID-19 scare. They also say that there is very little to suggest that monkeypox has mutated.
We should say that most of the people who have been identified so far have had more mild disease, or let's say not severe disease. And the thing I just want to say here is that this is a containable situation.
Smallpox vaccines are 85% effective in preventing monkeypox. Several countries have started stockpiling them in preparation for new outbreaks. South Korea, as of now, has enough vaccines for more than 35 million people, almost 70% of the population. Kim Yeon-sung, Arirang News.
On the entertainment front, K-pop girl group Blackpink is the latest cover star of Rolling Stone. The US magazine unveiled its June cover on Monday, describing the group's members as pop supernovas. According to industry sources, Blackpink is the first girl group from Asia to grace the cover and just the third girl group ever after the Spice Girls and Destiny's Child. In a feature story, Rolling Stone claims the group is one of the most popular out of South Korea and says the group's music is explosive, invigorating and addictive. A local biotech company has come up with a way to raise the efficacy and reduce the adverse effect of anti-cancer drugs by making it possible to inject them in their active form. Our Yoon tells us what this means.
This is an anti-cancer drug called irinotecan that's been used to treat colon cancer. It gets injected into a patient in an inactive form before becoming active within the patient's body. This action not only makes the drug less efficient, but it also has risks of side effects.
Irinotecan is the most commonly used anti-cancer drug for metastatic colon cancer. It's inactive, so needs to be converted into an active anti-cancer substance, SN38, in the liver. The conversion rate's about 5%, so it's necessary to develop a new anti-cancer compound to increase the treatment's effect.
Now, a domestic bio company has developed a method that melts the substances together in their active form, the first time that technology has made this possible.
We attach a hydrophilic compound to the parts of the insoluble drug that have similar properties. That forms a primary particle, but this primary particle also has both hydrophilic and hydrophobic parts. So we've developed a method that encloses this amphipathic compound to melt the insoluble particles.
Last year, this biodevelopment company presented their results from an animal testing to the American Cancer Society, during which they showed the drug's anti-cancer substance to be 4 times more effective in their active state. Since then, the company has conducted phase 1 clinical trials for colon cancer and stomach cancer and aim to enter phase 2 of clinical trials by the second half of this year. When this method becomes approved for commercialization, it will allow the anti-cancer drug to be administered in its active form, which would be in smaller doses than before, with the additional advantage of reducing side effects. 이은진, Arirang News.
Let's take a look at what's going on in the world now.
A 10-story building partially collapsed in Iran's southern city of Abadan on Monday, resulting in 5 deaths, with at least 80 people still trapped underneath the rubble. Iranian state TV aired footage showing piles of debris in the street, with people carrying the injured to safety. According to Abadan Emergency Services, the risk of further casualties is high, as the rest of the unfinished structure may still collapse. A further video reportedly shows angry Abadan residents chasing an official responsible for approving the building's construction. An investigation into the collapse has been ordered, while its owner and the contractor have been arrested. Turning over to New York, where a 48-year-old man was shot dead on the New York City subway on Sunday. Reports indicate that the suspect pulled out a gun and shot the victim in the chest without provocation while the Q train was crossing Manhattan Bridge. According to the NYPD's chief of department, the gunman remains at large after fleeing when the train pulled into Canal Street Station. A person of interest has been identified, while the gun from the attack has been recovered. The incident marks the latest killing on the city's public transit system, following the Brooklyn subway shooting in mid-April. After nearly 15 years in Russia, Starbucks announced on Monday that it will exit the market as the coffee company joins fast food chain McDonald's and ends its presence in the country. The Seattle-based coffee giant has 130 stores in Russia with some 2,000 employees, all operated through a licensee. Employees will get paid for 6 months, and Starbucks says it will help them find new jobs. The coffee company initially suspended all business activity in Russia in March, including product shipments to the country following Moscow's invasion of Ukraine. Starbucks hasn't provided details of the financial impact the exit will have. Tattoo artists in the Ukrainian capital Kyiv are using their skills in a tattooing marathon to raise money for the country's armed forces. In a former factory district of the city, the artists have inked some 50 to 70 customers each Saturday for the past 7 weeks. For many of the customers, the inspiration to get a tattoo has come from the war. So far, the initiative has raised approximately $9,000. Kyiv has seen parts reawaken after fighting moved away from the city in early April, with restaurants and bars reopening and groups of people filling the city's public spaces. On Monday, the U.S. Naval Academy's freshman class successfully climbed the greased 6.4-meter Herndon Monument located on the Academy's grounds. The traditional challenge sees cadets attempt to replace a freshman plebe Dixie Cup hat on top of the pillar with an upperclassman hat, marking the freshmen's official passage from first-year plebes to fourth-year class midshipmen. Dating back to 1950, the Herndon climb sees plebes attempt to mount the heavily greased monument in a show of perseverance, teamwork, and ingenuity. This year's class, which graduates in 2025, worked for 3 hours, 36 minutes, and 58 seconds before successfully replacing the cap. Matthew Ashley, Arirang News.
Good Tuesday afternoon. Yesterday, record-breaking temperatures hit the country, and Seoul is seeing 30 degrees again today, and even as high as 34 in some southern regions. Well, these unusually high temperatures will continue until tomorrow, and what's a sure sign that summer is upon us. Well, due to a dry and warm westerly wind blowing into the country, it feels just like we're in the middle of July, with highs topping off over 30 degrees in most regions. So stay out of the abnormal heat and be mindful of wide gaps in the evening. And the sun is shining brightly with little to no cloud cover, so keep an eye on the UV index and high ozone level, both of which will be very high across the country. In this weather, it's very important to stay cool, so drink lots of fluids and avoid excessive outdoor activities. Well, luckily, we have spring showers in the forecast for Thursday, and things will cool down afterwards. So now, let's take a look at the worldwide weather conditions.
And on that note, we say goodbye. Do join us again same time tomorrow. Thank you for now.